yeah, 10 years ago in the winter, I have to wear a down jacket. Now I don't. I thought that was the scale that we were talking about. But no, it can happen in really just in 2 months. So since then, I've been working on researching on coral restoration, and still what I'm doing today, very different vehicle. So.
And do you ever feel anxious or any trauma or stress about the climate?
For sure, for sure. What I did not tell during the 2 months, the water, I have to say, it was the most disgusting diving experience that I've ever had. The water, when you look into the bay, it looked like tea. When you jump into the water, there's a thick layer of toxic algae. And after that, for that 2 months, I just have skin allergy, like over the course of 2 months, because it's that bad. The water quality was that bad. And as a scientist by training, I have to admit, I used to be a climate pessimist, because looking at the numbers, you know how drastic change that we need to reverse to make climate mitigation possible. But I think at a venue like this, one thing that I realize as I look into the numbers and look in the trajectory that we have had, looking at the big conferences, looking at the big statement, bold statement, we're not really heading towards that. So I think that was the time I was very pessimistic. I can't tell if this anxiety, but I'm like, I'll just live my own life. But what I'm doing has no hope. There's no future, because even if we found the science behind it, there's no action being taken. But 2.5 years ago, I think there's a bigger trend pushing from the private sectors and the civil society that we need to take action. And the more the trend that I'm seeing, I feel more hopeful. And I am hopeful today, especially in a venue like this, that I'm taking away not just a bold statement or just a mission or another promises, but we are walking away with a lot of follow-up actions. So it's getting better.
Great. I like the hope. Mirko, what about you?
Yes, so my path to this passion for sustainability is not as linear. So I actually, back in the day, started in competitive sports, and that didn't work out due to reasons. But then at some point, I started studying sustainability and innovation management in Switzerland, not too far from here. And during that time, there was an election in the US around 5-6 years ago, and we know what happened. Some of the professors who were teaching sustainability were really devastated. I felt like seeing their life work falling apart due to the regulatory changes there. And combining that with what we learned in the studies, for me, it was kind of sparking this old competitive nature. And making me want to kind of put my energy, like channel the energy into that direction. And this is kind of also maybe transitioning to the second part of the question about the eco-anxiety. I think it's very important to find your niche of purpose, like where you can actually make a small change that you can measure and see, because that keeps you going, because then you can kind of focus on this area instead of being overwhelmed by everything that is going on, and get the energy out of the progress that you see.
Thank you. Pato, what about you?
So I'm from Botswana, and I'm from my family, most of them have smallholder farmers for generations, almost all my parents' siblings and some of my cousins now. And with time, there are certain changes that we saw. So the crops were seeing less yield. In Botswana, I think around, numbers escape me. I never want to mention numbers on stage because then I forget. But it was in the early 2010s when we almost had a drought. The city, the dam that supplies my city with water was at around 7%, and we're facing just day zero, basically. And all of these things were happening, and I never, you know something's wrong, but you don't know what, until I became a part of the climate conversations. And the more I learned, the more then I made the connection between the reason we're getting less on the farm is because of this. The reason we don't have a water and we're facing a water crisis in my city is because of this. So we were already living these realities. We were already going through this, and it was really a thing of connecting the two. And then once I knew that, baffled me, because at that point I wasn't even studying climate change. I wasn't even that deep into it. I'm like, but you know this is happening, then why are you not doing something? Like, and that's how I then got into working within climate change, also acting for climate justice, where it's not just climate action, but also how is this influencing, how is this impacting people? And that's how I got into the space, believing that we need to do something. And then for me, what made me act was knowing what's happening. So I think we really need to share what's happening so that people can act, people can know. We can't act on climate change if we don't even know about it, if we know how it's affecting us, but we don't know what it is. So that, I think, is what got me into it. And then on to eco-anxiety. Because you know so much, like sometimes with climate, you're just like, I wish I knew less. Because then you could just like walk around and be like, you know, yeah, it's a little bit hard to
ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss.
But then there are those visuals, right?
Exactly.
When everybody lands in Davos and there's no snow to ski.
Well,
it's kind of hard to be ignorant.
Mine is, and then you get home, well, in Botswana, then there's a drought and the animals are dying, and then there's a flood and cows are going with the water and the flood. So images like that. So how I deal with it is the belief that we can still do something. Mm-hmm. The most important, the thing that keeps me going right now is the research by scientists that says, this is where we are, this is what can be done, and this is how you can contribute to that. Believing that what I do can fix this, believing that what I do, or what we all do, what we collectively do, can still help us, keeps me going.
Amazing. You know, listening to the three of you, there's the idea of theoretical knowledge, abstract knowledge, but the most powerful is experiential knowledge, right? The experience. As a YGL, one of my first experiences was going to Greenland. Mm-hmm. And I remember standing with fellow YGLs, and we were watching an iceberg. It's actually a very rare event. The scientific term is to calve, which is to split in half. And it was skyscraper size. And we're literally videoing this. And the way the water rose, it was like tsunami level, and we actually started running. And that footage was actually used by former Vice President Al Gore in his climate reality training. And I can seriously say that changed my life and actually helped steer my trajectory in Amnesty. So let me ask all of you, you know, how would you describe young people taking up the mantle of climate leadership through advocacy, innovation, education? What are you seeing in how young people are trying to improve? And these are sort of three important pillars: the speed, for sure, the scale, and the quality.
Yeah, I think a lot of us know, even like my generation is interesting because it's kind of in the transition where I remember how climate was like when I was a lot younger. But nowadays, I'm also seeing a huge change, drastic change. But to be like, I don't know if it's a luck or not. I don't know if I will be fully impacted by the time that during my lifetime. So I know the biggest victim is actually not me. It's actually the even younger generation. I'm witnessing the process. What I'm doing, feel like obligated to do is being in the transition, being the whistleblowers, to advocate the problem and to make sure that we are on the right track. We cannot miss a second chance to reverse climate damage. If you look at the numbers, we have already missed the best chance. This decade is the most important when it comes to ecosystem restoration. And I can make a personal bold statement here, but don't quote me, is that what we are investing today is going to be at least 10 times more effective if we spend it 10 times later. Because by the time we will be over the tipping point, and there's very, very limited resources that our next generation, even despite how innovative or how powerful or how resourceful they are, it's just limited resource that they can reverse. So I would say the power of youth is that clearly they are the victims and they have the most powerful voices because what we're doing today is doing damage to them. So I think with that identity and part of the luxury that, like for example, my parents, it's not like they don't like the nature, but back in the days, they really have to be taking care of their families, making a livelihood, so they don't have the luxury or the freedom to think about the environment. But as younger generation, I think we have the freedom and we are the victims. So I think to that is really powerful that the youth are also taking action and voicing out.
To me, it's amazing that as a young person, you're thinking of the generation even after you, which is not something probably, understandably, maybe we'll be gracious with our benefit of the doubt that the previous generation tried the best that they could. And just speaking of anxiety, to me, it's very interesting. You're working in the context, you're from Hong Kong, you're living in Abu Dhabi. Besides the environmental degradation that you see, you're describing the ocean as like tea-colored. Those are some hostile environments to work in as well as a whistleblower. So that's a whole nother panel we can do on self-care. But what about you?
Yeah, I think it has so many different dimensions that it's hard to grasp in one. So the first thing, I think it's obvious that the old systems are not going to solve it. So we need system change and well thought through system change. But the second thing, and you mentioned it already, is speed. And I think speed is something that we as a younger generation can and have to bring in. We are used to kind of another speed in our daily life. We are brought up with all kinds of devices that we handle all the time, and we have to kind of try to translate that into taking action as well, which is not easy. But I think this freedom of choice of ours to go into that area of sustainability as a profession, for example, is much easier for us than the generations before, because we don't have to kind of go into one career for 40 years as it maybe was a few generations back. We can now just really focus on one topic and then maybe also change after 5 or 10 years because technology changes, the circumstances changes. So this flexibility that we bring to the table can hopefully really accelerate the whole process.
Also very interesting, in my therapy sessions, I often have parents that just can't believe their children, or if they're a caregiver, can wear multiple hats, because the previous generation's thought is, I am a doctor for life, I am an engineer for life, I am a lawyer for life. And it is just indescribable, and particularly what gives parents, usually or older people, adults, a heart attack is, when young people are like, I want to be a YouTube influencer. So there's a total disconnect there. But you actually bring up an interesting point. We're kind of now psychologically wired with, Insta everything, right? I want Insta dry cleaning, Instagram, but yet that's not translating in political will with the climate. And I think there's an analysis paralysis. When I speak to, teenagers or parents think that they're just going through a phase and they're being obstinate or so on and so forth, but they're just actually paralyzed by the magnitude. And to your point about finding a niche, I think that's a very healthy way of find what you're good at, excel in that corner, and then go from there. So thanks for that. What about you, Pato?
I'm actually glad you touched on Instagram, because I'm going to Instagram careers, because I'm going to come to that. But before I make my input, I just wanted to comment on some of what my co-panelists said. What you said about what we don't do now will in a few years basically be 10 times the cost. So again, loss and damage last year was really big at COP, and it's a thing of, it's either right now we build resilience, we invest in resilience, or we're paying the bill on loss and damage. Either way, this bill will be paid, either now or later. Well, either it'll be an investment or a cost. And then what you said about it's easier to act. Now, as we're young people, I think there's also the thing of just, we don't have a choice. When I grew up, we took food from the farm to the village and to the city, and now we bring food for like the herdman and some of our family who stays. So that forces us to act. And then to the point that you said of what young people are doing, I think we just meet the most mind-blowing young people. That's also what keeps me going. The way that young people within the movement are leading, they're leading with solidarity. You'll get people in Botswana, in South Africa, talking about what young people in Pakistan are going through, what young people in Southern America are going through. So there's a lot of solidarity. There's a lot of fighting for justice and people taking action. Earlier you said we're the generation that's apparently entitled and all of that. Well, we're entitled to clean air and stuff.
Well said.
We're demanding things like a world we can exist in. But some of the young people who really, really inspire me whenever I'm like, are we even doing enough? There's Wanjuhi, you spoke of political will. There's Wanjuhi who is a global shaper. She sits on the Global Shapers board as well. And last year, 2 years ago, she ran for a seat on politics in Kenya. And that's someone who's been working in climate for years. That means when she's in, that is decisions being made for people. Her thing is people, planet, I forget the third P, but it's decisions at political level that are made not only for the environment, but also for the people. There's Deborah, also a global shaper. She's from Nigeria and she works in renewable energy. Brilliant, brilliant young lady, where it's like, Africa, we've got an energy crisis, but we also have Deborah, and we have the Deborahs of the world. And then young people are also organizing. We've got the African Climate Alliance in South Africa, which is growing across the continent. We've got YALDA, which is mobilizing young people to act together, to be in solidarity. Even businesses, there's a business in Botswana called Viva Organica, which was by young people, recently won one of the awards at Youth Adapt around young people acting on climate. And the last one, Instagram. So earlier I spoke about how something that got me to act was knowing more. You've got Instagram influencers who will take a COP decision paper, who will take a report and break it into 10 slides. You've got TikTokers who will just go and you're entertained and you're learning and then you're upset and then you act. But there's such an important role for how young people are finding innovative ways of communicating, and with that spurring even more people to act. So if your child wants to be an Instagram influencer, please buy them Eldering Light. So yeah.
No, I mean, so I think maybe the third P is policy, people, planet, policy.
Possibly.
Get back to me on that. I'd be quite curious to know.
I will.
But you're speaking to a very good point about know your audience. Though I would say that's a double-edged sword with disinformation.
Yes.
And a lot of people, I think it's very important also to, especially with climate science and conspiracy theories, and we've seen that with COVID-19, to stay in your lane in a way. But absolutely, we can make it joyful, hopeful language. I remember Amnesty at our Global Assembly, we had a linguist come and give a keynote, and Martin Luther King would not be as effective if he started his speech with "I have a complaint." So there is something to be said about that. So let me ask all of you, because there's a very impressive career so far and influence. What would you say, because this is being live streamed, what strategies of young people have you found most compelling in influencing policy, big business agendas like we have here at WEF?
You guys want to share?
I mean, it can be anything, right? From throwing paint at Van Gogh. I'm disclaimer, I'm not personally recommending that, but what are some strategies?
Okay. Oh, would you like me to go first?
Please.
Okay, so again, something that works, I think, organizing. Working in the advocacy space, it's not like when you're in the business space, because when you're in the business space, you do this work and at the end of the quarter, you've got your KPIs, your deliverables, you know how much you made, whereas advocacy is a longer journey, and the results are not always as obvious to see. But something that I've been seeing is where young people organize and we're calling out companies, we're doing all of this, and being in the space of a lot of CEOs, you hear people saying, yes, we have to do these things because it makes economic sense, which also, there are a lot of things that make economic sense that we shouldn't be doing, but that aside, and then they'll say, if we don't do this, the activists will come for us. The young people will come for us. So where it sometimes just feels like a tweet, they are feeling the pressure and we need to keep it on. And it was very affirming as someone who sent out some hot tweets to know that when people see them, they're being spoken about in spaces where business decisions are being made, in spaces where decisions about where the world is going is being made. So one of the things, definitely organizing, and also how young people are choosing to spend their money. businesses want money. We can talk about business purpose and most of them just want money. And young people, even though they don't sit on the boards, they're able to say, I will not buy from you because you do X, Y, Z in relation to the environment. They're voting with their money, and with that, they're leading businesses they almost lead businesses by the nose, where they're like, this is where my money is. My money is where there's climate action. My money is where there's no environmental degradation. My money is here, and you then need to follow our money. So I think the two things, in conclusion, how young people are spending their money and young people.
And to your point about KPIs, I was on a panel yesterday with for mental health at work with Dr. Tedros of the World Health Organization, and I think KPIs need to be beyond key performance indicators, but keep people interested, keep people inspired, keep people informed.
Yeah, that's actually the first point I would have mentioned as well. In Germany, there's the Fridays for Future movement is very big, and they were beloved a bit in the beginning, and people said, hey, let them do this, and it will pass, and we will continue old business. It didn't, and they keep topics on the agenda. So it's not always about actively changing something right away, but keeping the topic there and letting people know it's not going anywhere. That's the first thing. The second then is, I think, the bringing people together in the sense of international collaboration as well. We are kind of natively connected to all kinds of different influences from all over the world. That is very different to the generations before. And then the third one, from my perspective, maybe a bit personally or professionally, is kind of lowering the entry barriers for companies to act. So providing solutions, because we kind of grew up with this new framework. For us is actually people, planet, profit. So I don't know if it's the only definition of the three Ps, but this is ours. We grew up with this thinking and kind of think in those business models natively, without kind of having to think in the old structures and then translate that into the new ones. So I think that helps us innovate as well, and kind of providing solutions that can be adapted and can then also push the corporates into moving into that direction, because they want, of course, to keep their market share and their importance.
Exactly. Business is in the business of business.
For sure, for sure. I think actually, we echo a lot of the messages, but I think there's a few points that I would like to re-emphasize. Like Pato, you said, I think many of the behavioral changes from a consumer perspective are actually pushed by the younger generation. But that doesn't mean that it's exclusive to the younger generation. I'm sure many of us here have this environmental awareness that's not necessarily exclusive to a specific race or gender or age. I think it is just a thought leader, because they care about the environment and they make these movements and behavioral changes to the society across different geographies and levels. And to your point, I think when it comes to the most impactful movement or agenda, I think the most constructive ones are the ones that can be integrated into businesses, because after all, we need no more polarization. There's no point to finger point at problem causing, like who are the victims, who are making the problems. I think it's important that we're moving to a world where it can be constructive. Someone is raising out the problems, but also we're working collectively together for a future that's all of us are going to be benefited.
So to your point, like historically, human rights organizations would be like bad business, bad corporations. But at Amnesty, we've changed strategy, because when we look at something like the climate crisis, that needs everybody to get behind it. It is literally everyone's issue, and it is an umbrella for everything else. So very good point on sort of integrating in a holistic perspective. Let me open it up. Does anybody in our committed and small audience have a question?
Sure, thank you. This is a great panel. I have a question. Thank you. I work in the education space, and specifically in regions of the world where schools don't exist, and helping communities get schools for their children. And we're been implementing climate resilience education in those spaces. And these are children who have never been to school, their parents have never been to school, and they live in a part of the world that is not in the developed world where climate impact and buildings and concrete are being used. A lot of it is villages, out in the wilderness, in the remote areas. Looking at partnerships for an organization like mine, or in fact any school in any part of the world, what are the organizations that are doing good work, partnering with education institutions of all kinds that you see doing great work? And what does that work look like?
Please ask the question again.
Well, is there an organization partnering, like an environmental organization? You're working on coral reef. We have one of our hubs is in Madagascar that we just opened in this summer, and we were invited to it by Blue Ventures, which you may know, and they've been there for 15 years helping the people of Madagascar sustainably catch their fish and bring them to market and actually turn a profit. And they called us and said, we need help because our fisher people they can't read, write, or count. And so when they go to market, they are, taken advantage of. And that partnership has been really powerful in Madagascar where we are, because it's kind of like a lot of things are happening. Children are becoming literate, and their families are learning to, do sustainable catches and take care of the place where the fish are to catch them, so they'll be there tomorrow. Partnerships that my question is, schools and at the education space, the children coming up into the world, they need something robust and real to kind of latch on to and be a part of if they're going to, turn the corner for climate resilience. And what organizations are partnering with educational institutions around the world? And if there are none, maybe we need to start finding some or creating them.
So I would just say, it's a really good point. In some of the conversations I've been having here at Davos, we were talking about how curriculum just generally needs to be revamped, right? When we're like business schools, what you're teaching. Yesterday on the mental health panel, I was actually saying how really, traditionally, a lot of medical schools they teach, a healthy patient is a lost client. What are we incentivizing? I know, for example, from Amnesty International, we have robust human rights education programs in our various country offices, but more in relation to climate, which is a topic, maybe Greenpeace, maybe. But I defer to the experts.
I can maybe just say one example out of our perspective, because we as the Hamburg Hub do collaborate with one organization. They're called Futurepreneur, and they're about kind of bringing those entrepreneurial values to children at school, which I find very important and interesting, because it's not about starting a business that has to be done as an entrepreneur, but it's more about the values of kind of compassion and steady learning. We touched upon the flexibility of that you have to be adaptable over time. So those kind of things, to see that out of a practical position, and not from someone who's taught the same thing for the last 30 years, but from someone who's actually doing something practically, whom you can talk to afterwards and ask questions and get connections to, and how do I do this? How can I achieve that? I think this is very important, to connect practice with the education as well at that point.
Yeah, I echo with that too. And I think when it comes to, just do it quick. I think when it comes to education, of course, it is an industry in itself. But I think more often time, I think I'm seeing it as an element that can be fully integrated in different business model or business, different organizations. So I think when it comes to the integration, when it comes to the curriculum, as you said, it's about the applicability. So for example, in Australia, you can have this fully immersive environmental education that's integrated in the curriculum, where in Hong Kong, we don't even know what to fit into which subject.
Rote memorization.
Yep. So I think it depends on where you are. In Hong Kong, we do have that environmental education, but it has to be more experiential. It has to be fun. So I think this education element has to be local adaptive, and that can also be expressed in a commercial and corporation as well, to educate their staff about the importance of sustainability.
So changing the narrative and the paradigm.
I think your question, firstly, ditto to what everyone has said so far, your conversation on which organizations are doing the work, there are quite a couple, not too many come to mind, so I'm not going to do that because then it throws me off, but initiatives that are being done at local scale where they're able to package information for the society, so for, let's say, a certain learning group. So there's a lady, I forget her surname and I forget the organization that she runs, but I will tell you about it if we talk after this. Her name is Belinda, and she is working in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there's this program that she's written up, and then there's a manual, but it's a really, really amazing program. Would be happy to connect you with her. Again, Africans working within their space, within their homes. Wanjuhi also does a project, I think tree planting, but also school and knowledge, and again, teaching the ethics, not so much just the theory of this is climate change. And yeah, there are a lot of, there are quite a number of initiatives, but we can talk after.
Wonderful. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. I'm just kind of wondering how you support yourself financially doing this type of work, because I remember in the Youth CEO Dialogue, and we heard from the McKinsey associate, where you spend your days and your day job is what you should be thinking about, and that was kind of the advice. And so I'm thinking about that now, and yeah, advocacy for me at least is more volunteer and is more on the sidelines. So I'm just curious on your perspective on that.
Maybe it's easiest to answer for me because we talked about the 3 Ps and with profit in there, and we started our company with a profit in mind, so that we can also support ourselves and also, of course, support other very, very smart people who could work somewhere else and make money somewhere else, because I really believe we need the best people in this space, and for that we also need to pay them something, because those are the ones who will drive the whole topic forward. So just a small remark towards investments, of course, as well. We need investments, risk investments also flowing in that space to pay the people working on the topics.
For sure. I think when it comes to the ecopreneur, for example, is a new thing to talk about. And I think it's really important that we are putting profitability into consideration, because my personal, I was a PhD, and I thought I would either go to an international NGO or be in academics or work in the government. But I know that these places might not be the best playground to accelerate technological adoption. But I also need to feed myself. And we're doing things that are very new, so we need to build a team. So I think back then, I think it's really important that I set up the company as a B2B for-profit, because I know there's a very passionate senior of mine, a few years older, super, super passionate, but when I look at his salary compared to the market value, it was so underpaid as a professional. And eventually he has to quit the job because he's getting married, he has to feed the family. And I think that was the moment I realized how important it is to keep financial sustainability in pushing to different environmental agenda. So profitability has always been important, going back to R&D, scaling the technology, and more importantly, keeping the talent in the pool to make sure that they can continue to grow and support in this industry is very important. Ecopreneur is not only about doing good for the environment, but also creating this market value and market gap for the private sector's buy-in, and also are self-sustaining to the team and further building the industry. So I think it is possible, and I think that's a luxury to have as a younger generation.
I think mine might be from a bit of a different angle, because advocacy, and as advocates and activists, for some reason, everyone just thinks they're entitled to your free labor. You're called everywhere. Joss, I know you do work in the indigenous space. We could like horror stories around people being entitled to free labor within advocacy. So I've got an honors in accounting and finance, decided that was not for me, and went into this and trying to somehow make it a full-time occupation. On the bright side, because it's such a growing field, there is a lot of space to find where to come in, even from an advocacy perspective. And then, passion work. The other thing that I struggled with within the space was because it's such passion-fueled work, I struggled to charge for it. I still struggle to charge for it. You don't know where do I start to charge? Am I not then bringing in the whole capitalism thing of pay me to do human rights work? But also know that people are being paid for knowledge. There are consultants who are charging astronomical amounts of money per hour to come and speak to you and say they're doing research. Then they're going to package it and charge it tens of thousands. So even when you do your work, know that you're sharing knowledge. Unfortunately, in the system that we live within, there's certain knowledge that we say can be paid for and can't be paid for. So if you are a certain person of a certain race and so forth, and you say something, then we can pay for it. But if you're an indigenous person talking about your life experiences, it's free as soon as someone else puts it in a book. Now it's knowledge we can pay for. So know that you're sharing knowledge, that knowledge is important. You're doing work, you need to survive, you need to somehow eat. So don't feel bad about the fact that you need to survive. If you're not surviving, then you're going to have to leave the movement like some of the people they did. So I work for South African Climate Action Network part-time as well. I've got a Patreon which helps fund the podcast, and the idea behind that, even with where your money is coming from, when you start to look at how do you finance it, be careful of where you accept your money to come from, because people will use the fact that they can, almost greenwash their image with, we've got Joss on, which means people who fight for indigenous rights, advocate for indigenous rights, endorse our behavior. So just be careful with that.
It's the power of association.
Power of association, that's exactly what I was looking for. Power of association, look at how you can democratize how you're raising your funds so that no individual can tell you what to say, about anything. So sorry for going on so long, but it was something for me that I really struggled with when I pivoted careers 3 years ago.
That can be a whole other session, and it's such a great question. I think, at least in terms of advocacy and activism, there's a complicated relationship with money. Yeah. It can be viewed as a dirty word. Profit and impact they're not mutually exclusive necessarily. In Amnesty, we've had very interesting conversations about, what are we incentivizing? And then it goes into toxic workplaces, burnout, vicarious trauma of what people in your spaces what they see. And then if you go really further, there's also workers' rights. It can be very exploitative. So there's a lot to be said. And now I actually feel like it's quite a mystery that's come out of this session. What is the third P? Because is it passion? Is it purpose? Is it profit? Is it policy? Is it political will? Anybody's guess, and maybe we can reconvene. Okay, last question.
Power.
Power. Yes. Power.
People, planet, power.
There you go.
Someone texted it to me. I guess someone's watching the live stream and they texted it to me. Thank you.
I love that. People, planet, power.
Yes.
But I think the P is for prosperity. Hi, everyone. Yeah. I'm loving this panel. I'm Namgit Choden. I am from the Global Shapers Thimphu Hub in Bhutan. I'm also a climate reality leader, and I have previously worked in the government working on climate policy and climate negotiations. So I want to ask and talk about intergenerational and intersocietal allyships without being tokenized. And I feel that what I've found really missing in the conversation is talking about how we can work meaningfully with our policymakers and with the government, with the public service especially. What would be some thoughts around that? And I'm also aware that sometimes the context is very, very different, where access is simply not possible. So young people have taken to alternative spaces. But tell me more about where you come from and how you look at working with governments.
So briefly, any comments?
I can put it in my closing remarks. Oh, let me wait.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually, the whole thing of policy, it comes into what I was hoping would be my closing remarks, because the main thing that I wanted to say is vote with your money, with at the ballot, and politicians listen to one thing. I said this a few months ago on a panel, but politicians listen to one thing. They want to be the leading party. Vote for the politician who you feel will deliver on what's important to you in terms of climate policies, in terms of protecting the environment, in terms of protecting the people. If as young people, we know that how big a demographic we are. If we're coming out and voting for what we say we want, politicians are going to have to act that way, because that's the only way to get our vote. Businesses, if we say we want something, then that's where you spend your money is what you're voting for, is what you're encouraging. What you said earlier, what do we reward? What are we reward? What kind of behavior are we rewarding from businesses? And then the last thing, organize, organize, organize. There's a reason that the biggest company, one of the biggest companies in the world, Amazon, is putting so many resources into stopping organizing. The reason that CEOs are talking about activists today is because they're organizing. People are trying to stop organizing for a reason. It threatens the systems that exist. We need to organize. So vote and organize.
Well said.
Well said. Thank you.
Can we be innovative and combine closing remarks with also an answer?
Yeah, very good one. Of course, I think young people have to take just a bigger role in policy making in general. So this is about, of course, the one thing would be then running for office. We have heard this one before, but also in then communicating with policymakers in regard of what is out there, what can be done, what do people want or need who are not in this area of policy making at the moment. So kind of a communicative and bridge building role that I think young people should and have to take at that point. And maybe towards those who currently do it is also the message that young people vote with money, with vote, and just from another perspective. So a totally different view on things, and this has to be taken seriously, I think, even though sometimes it feels that we're not there yet.
Absolutely.
Use our freedom of speech to hold them accountable and make sure that they're putting their worth in their, like putting the word, realizing it into action. So I think that would be the closing.
Thank you very much. So really quickly, I'll say, as of 10 years ago, I could write an op-ed of 2,000 words. Attention spans have completely reduced, 800 words. So I'm going to keep this almost like in tweet form. So what I've got from this really rich conversation today, and to the older adults and everybody at Davos listening, young people are setting standards. They have integrity. What are their bosses doing? What are the CEOs doing? How are you investing? What are the companies up to? And they will not hesitate to quit. So standard setting, connection. I have a very young person on my board of Amnesty International. He is my greatest teacher. Like digital natives, you all are just born connected, and you enhance that connection, and it's extremely important. We're all a witness globally. At the drop of a tweet, social media, if anybody underestimates what a tweet can do, I refer you to Greta's tweet where she took off 38 luxury cars. And persistence. That is a timeless classic. We have to be in some ways satisfied right now, moving the needle even an inch, because we're still making people, the planet, our environment better than we found it. So I really want to thank all of you that have come for your commitment, and I will just end with saying this: when nothing is certain, everything is possible. Thank you so much. Thank you.